non-sequence of the agenda. Thank you. Anybody wants to remove or add anything from the consent? Okay, seeing none. There's no announcements, no declaration. Staff presentation from Mr. Peter Fay, the City Clerk, on the new Council Office Support Model.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is just a continuation of the work of this committee as we work towards implementation of the new support model, which, as just a reminder, will take effect on April 15th. I just have a few slides here. Some of them are very familiar. And then if committee has any questions, we can deal with those. There is a portion of today's agenda which is closed session, which will talk about some transitional matters, and we can discuss those appropriately during closed session. So very quickly, this is the work plan that you may be familiar with from the last time that this committee met on February 12th. In terms of staffing, one of the things I'd like to go over today, published with the agenda, was the draft job descriptions for the three types of positions: the executive assistant, the administrative assistant, and the counselor aide. And the actual duties and qualifications were part of that draft job description. And if members have any questions about that, our goal would be to try to almost work towards finalizing that so we can get the package ready for you when you're at the point of making offers to potential contract staff in the coming weeks. As part of that, there is the Council Office Management and Ethical Framework. What I'd like to do today is that, again, was updated a little bit since the last meeting. It was published with the agenda on Friday. I'd like to sort of walk through that, not verbatim, but certainly by section to make sure you're comfortable. And if you have any questions about what is contained in there, we can address those. And again, it is still very much a work in progress. And we talked at the last meeting about training opportunities for you, essentially as managers, as supervisors of employees on a go-forward basis. And we are working to schedule some training sessions. We'll probably set out some blocks of time between March 15th and April 15th, and also probably some time after that on a number of different training areas. Some will include in-person training from our subject matter experts within HR, within other areas of the city, and we are looking to bring in some experts from outside the city to assist with training in terms of your responsibilities as an employer. I'd like to touch today a little bit about accommodations. You may recall at the last meeting, committee made a recommendation. Council has adopted that recommendation to allow each councillor discretion in terms of installing the 2 touchdown stations in place of the 1 existing constituency assistant station. So what we'd like to do is just revisit that, make sure that we can answer any questions you may have. Our goal is we will be reaching out to you within the next 2 days to look for a response from each of you in writing as to whether or not you wish to proceed with the 2 touchdown workstations or keep your workstation as is for the 1 person. We'll be looking for sign off from each of you by this Wednesday, so the orders can be placed for the necessary workstations and we can proceed. And as committee talked about last meeting, if a member of council decides not to pursue the 2 touchdown stations in place of the 1 workstation and they wish to go to that model in the future after April 15th, that will be expensed back to their business expense account, the appropriate cost for that. And finally, on financials, we are still working through the cost centers, and we anticipate conversation during the 2019 budget process on the offsets, the appropriate offsets to pay for the council office support model. So with that, I'd like to just sort of touch on, again, this is a revisiting of the accommodations. So in yellow are the 2 workstations, temporary touchdown workstations for each of the councillors' offices. The only 2 that are not co-located are for Councillor Medeiros. And based on conversations with Councillor Medeiros and Councillor Fortini, I believe they're probably leaning towards not going to the 2 touchdown stations. So we'll be looking for that from each of you in writing over the next few days. And then we'll be doing the same with all the other members to make sure that we can respect your wishes. So if there's any questions on that, we'd be happy to answer that. Otherwise, we're going to be proceeding, and we'll be asking for your sign-off, within 2 days. And then finally, in terms of next steps, we're going to be talking in closed session today about some transitional matters as we work towards the April 15th effective date for the new model. And some policy and document updates will come at the next meeting. We actually were scheduled to have a meeting this morning with finance to review the expense policy to make sure it meets the new council support model, but we couldn't make that meeting happen, so we'll do that in time to bring an update to this committee at its next meeting. And that's the update in public, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any questions from anybody. So, thank you, Peter. So we'll move on to reports 07. There's none.
I'm sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, do you wish to go through and talk about each of the job descriptions that were attached to the agenda, or are members satisfied with those?
I don't see any questions, so.
Okay.
Just on the working stations, I did see, that's what I was really looking for. It was up to us if we're gonna, each counselor, and that'll be everyone's choice, whatever they wanna do. That's all, other than that. Okay, we'll move on to other new business. I don't see anything on deferred, matters, 9.1. So do we bring, 11 we'll go to 11.1, just bring it over, Mr. Clerk?
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay, so we'll have a discussion on the printing and mailing, the costs of, members of council. So we'll bring also on 11.1 from, Charmaine Williams. So. Okay. Yours as well. Anybody have any questions? No? We're on 9.1. We also brought forward the 11.1 on the printing mail costs of member of council from the office. It was from Councilor Charmaine Williams. So I don't see any on the board, so we'll move that on. So we go on to 9.2, accountability, government's matter update. That was something that was, I think we left behind last time.
So, Mr. Chair, this was just a verbal update to the committee about some new requirements that are in place as of March 1st that are coming, so just to make members aware, in terms of accountability and governance. So there are actually three new policies that we talked about at the last meeting. Council has now adopted all of those policies dealing with council staff relations, parental pregnancy leave for members of council, and tree canopy, which has already been encapsulated in official plan policy. As well, as of March 1st, under the revisions to the Municipal Act, there's now a requirement for conflict of interest. So when a member declares a conflict of interest at a meeting, the practice for those members who have done it before is you declare it verbally, and then you remove yourself from the debate, from influencing the debate, and you don't vote during that matter. The new requirement under the Municipal Act is still to do that, but also to actually make that declaration in writing. And I think you'll probably see a report, if memory serves me, at the Region Appeal this week with a similar requirement. We have, and we've posted it with the agenda, and it's on the screen, prepared a written statement of disclosure for conflict of interest. That'll be used for Brampton City Council, and we have copies at the clerk's table, and we'll make them available should or if a member would ever have to declare conflict. And we'd be happy to answer any questions on that. But just to let you know, this is now a new requirement of the Municipal Act as of March 1st.
Okay. Any question? Councilor Bowman?
Just a question, through you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, Peter. In the past, there has been matters that have come up that I've declared a pecuniary interest just in an abundance of caution. If I'm declaring it simply in an abundance of caution, which of these three would it be deemed as?
Who's asking the same thing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would depend on the actual statement that you make with your pecuniary interest. So say it's an abundance of caution because it is a spouse, then it would be under the indirect or the deemed. But if it affects you directly, then it would be the direct pecuniary.
Okay,
So
and
it all
would
depend
we-
on the circumstances.
Would we write in the nature of the conflict in an abundance of caution?
If that's what the member chooses to write. And I should also point out that this written statement under the Act has to be made publicly available. So the city, like a number of municipalities, will be posting these statements verbatim online.
Okay, thank you.
Can the chair be heard? So, thank you, Peter. So what happens when we go through our budget? And a lot of times we have to separate, I've noticed a lot of people have someone working for the city. I know my daughter, we used to work for the city. We have to separate, and she was part-time for Park and Rec.
So
That would be the same?
That through you, Mr. Chair, you're right. That will be exactly the same in terms of if council needs to take votes separately to allow a particular member who's declared a conflict
Yep.
the greatest opportunity to vote on as much of the budget as possible. Then where it makes sense and where we can actually separate those things out, we'll do that with the assistance of the budget chair.
And you'll remind us.
We will remind you of declarations that have been declared in the past, but we can't know what your declarations are in the future.
Councilor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would we need to fill out this form if I'm not on it?
Put your name back on, sorry. Put your name. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Would this form need to be, through you, Mr. Chair, to the clerk, would this form need to be filled out in the case where members of council are making a decision on their own salaries?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the answer was probably no, because that's an interest that's common to everybody. And if every member were to declare that interest, then there'd be no members left to actually have a vote. And under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, you can allow, even if quorum is 6, you can allow almost everybody to declare conflict. As long as you have still 2 members left, the act says you can actually have a vote. But I think that is a common interest, it's common to everybody, and I'm not aware of municipalities that have gone down that route. Unless there's a special stipend or something that is attributable to an individual member of council, then that individual member may have to declare conflict depending on the nature.
So for clarity, where an interest is deemed to be common and available to other members of council, or for example, members of the community, then there isn't a direct pecuniary interest, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Councilor Dillon.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the common practice has been throughout a number of municipalities, correct me if I'm wrong, is to any increase in salary is for the next term of council. And so I don't believe it would be considered a conflict of interest, even though there was a case in the last term where members directly benefited from it. But I think common practice is for the next term, and you're unsure if any council is unsure if they'll be part of that next term.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is a practice of some municipalities. This council last term made decisions on its own salary effective that point in time. There are previous terms and where council has made decisions affecting its remuneration that are effective for the following term. But there's nothing in the act that prevents that council from making that decision on its own salaries.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll move on to 9.3, procedure bylaws and main rules.
So, Mr. Chair, that was just a discussion item that I put on just because there was some opportunity during the orientation that members may recall for doing a review, and actually I think we ended up in this chambers to do a review of council procedures. But I know there's a few things that sort of I've heard about and I just wanted to raise, and if members have any individual questions on council's meeting rules, be happy to answer those. We are planning to do a chairing workshop. We were planning to do that in February, but events of the day have sort of overcome us, so we're looking to do that in March, a lunch and learn session for any member, but particularly chairs in terms of effective chairing of meetings. I will be honest with you. I will my observations the first 2-3 months of this term has been there has been a higher volume than expected of added business added to the meeting, for which notice essentially has not been given. When I say notice, the conventional wisdom is for procedure bylaw and for a meeting is there are a number of rights. I always like the council has a right, the majority have a right to make a decision. There's no question about that. The minority of council have a right to be heard before a decision's made. All members of council have a right to notice, so you need to know and be prepared for a council meeting about what's on the agenda. And when items are added, the procedure bylaw does not preclude you from adding items, and that's why there's a 2/3 vote. It's a higher test. But one of the issues is staff may not be fully informed or prepared to provide the best advice to you to make an informed decision or recommendation, and your council colleagues may not be aware of what's going on. So that's something that I've observed over the first few months, and we're going to be sort of looking at in the clerk's office and maybe bringing something forward to a future meeting to talk about how to address that. Because there are methods for addressing it in other municipalities. But again, it's up to council, it's the will of council how you wish to proceed. The other issue is, I think it's already been raised in terms of proclamations, so we are looking at revising our proclamation format. And we have now allowed for interim proclamations to be read at committee of council or council. So we'll be looking possibly at a procedure bylaw amendment to allow council to formalize that as part of its meetings if it chooses to do so. And then finally, just a question or a point I want to raise in terms of quorum. Just a reminder to members of council, quorum is 6 members. So if 6 members of this council are conversing on something that is advancing, could be perceived as advancing the business of the corporation, and those are the key words, whether it's through email, whether it's through a phone call, whether it's through a drink at a bar or something like that, that puts the municipality possibly at risk. So I would always remind you, if you have questions about that, please contact the clerk's office and we'll do our best to advise you. And that's why we suggest having meetings and some training sessions where it's not a formal meeting in small groups to avoid that requirement, because the Municipal Act is very clear that a meeting has a quorum, it's clerked, and there's notice given. Anything other than that is presumed to be an illegal meeting.
Okay. A couple of speakers, Councilor Maderos.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you, City Clerk. I do agree with you in terms of not only does it not allow, doesn't show respect for colleagues on, because a lot of these motions which have been walked in are not time sensitive. And I appreciate that some of my colleagues have this urgency to bring it forward. But not only does it impact, I guess, our timelines from a work perspective, it doesn't give proper notice to the public who have interest, who want to engage on some of these discussions, to come in and I have found that there's been that sort of I guess that trend. And through the chair, I guess I would. One thing I've noticed that we don't use here so much at the City of Brampton, and I'm probably just as culprit as everyone else, is I know at the region we do more notices of motion. And here it hasn't been so much of a practice per se. So I think that's something that either my colleagues are not aware of that function, about, giving that sort of notice and allowing everyone to do their due diligence, to have more of a meaningful discussion, and allow staff to be prepared accordingly.
Thank you. That could be part of the training when we train on motions and chairing, so that's a good idea. Thank you.
Councilor Dillon.
Sorry, just a question to the clerk through the chair in terms of having quorum. Does that include email? If you email something, so I was under the impression that if members of council were to meet, if possibly they went their meeting for whatever reason, it goes above quorum, so they have 6 or more. So they have quorum, rather. There has to be an agenda item. Or if it's some, like for example, last term of council, there was 6 members of council who were eating at a restaurant and there was a complaint made. Does the definition of quorum require an agenda or an agenda item that's being discussed? And the second question is for an email. If I was to email 7 or 8 or 9, 10 members of council, does that define, is that under the definition of quorum?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I hate to say it, it depends. So I think the key is not necessarily there's an agenda. It's as long as is the purpose of the gathering or the communication, if it's email or telephone call, for the purpose of advancing the business of the corporation. So if it's 6 members of council or more that are actually talking about something that may be coming to council for a decision, and they're effectively formulating positions on it, then that could be interpreted, depending on the facts, as advancing the business of the corporation outside a meeting. So it all depends. An agenda is not necessary. An email to members of council, and that happens all the time for staff to communicate, is more to communicate information. And if there's, a response back, that's fine, that may be okay. But if it starts to evolve into an ongoing discussion thread, a back and forth with all members of council, and it's dealing with business of the corporation, then that could be construed as advancing the business of the corporation outside a meeting.
So essentially it's anything, it's very anything that's advancing the business of the corporation, which is kind of vague, but that's pretty much the definition, right?
Yes, yes. If
Sure.
it's asking why did the Habs lose to the Leafs on Saturday, that's probably not advancing the business of the corporation, but if it's about building a new community center in a portion, in an area of the city, that could be construed as.
Thank you. Are you still on the board, Peter? Can the chair be heard? So, thank you, Peter. I was gonna bring that forward, I don't know if it was this committee or the next one, because what I find is, a lot of times we come in, we read our reports on a weekend, and it doesn't give staff enough time, and you guys always have to do the reports on a Friday. Meanwhile, we're getting our regional reports a week before, the Thursday, and it doesn't give you enough time. Anything new added to the agenda, what's not printed, could just wait the following 2 weeks. Because a lot of times we come in and a lot of stuff is being added, and it's the same way. So maybe we could look at that, whatever's done is done, whatever isn't done by Friday, just passes on to the following committee. You know, and it gives staff enough time, and it gives us enough time to read the stuff too. Yes, Joe.
To you, Chair, that is something we've worked with the city clerk's office to, in fact, remind all our staff, because right now, the exception is people are tracking on time with their reports, and there's a significant number being walked on, and we need to reverse that completely. And so I've made it very clear to everyone, and that message is being filtered down. It's not fair to council, it's not fair to the clerk's
Absolutely.
office that all these things get walked on. So that is our intent, is to move in that direction. We would greatly appreciate, in terms of the number of referred matters, or at least with the timing to come back on those, enough time so that we have the due diligence to put those reports forward, as well as maintain the clerk's deadlines for getting reports in moving forward.
So we don't need-
Recognizing that once in a while, one has to be walked on here and there.
Absolutely. So we don't need nothing on the committee. Do you need direction? You need a motion? Because I was gonna do it this committee won't come in.
Perhaps not at this time, to
Okay.
echo what the CEO said, that there's some
Okay.
new rules for staff, and when we bring back some discussion items through reports to this committee on the procedure bylaw rules, that'd be something that we will look at in terms of strengthening that agenda setting deadline.
Okay, great. Councilor Williams? Sorry, can you turn on your mic? I'm sorry. As soon as I touch it, goes off. Yeah.
Thank you, through you, Chair, to staff. Can you just remind us of what time items to be added to the agenda need to be into the clerk's office for?
By Friday.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the procedure bylaw today says new business for an agenda, whether it's a delegation or from a councillor, or through a notice of motion, to Councillor Medeiros' point, have to be into the clerk's office by 4:30 on the Tuesday, the week before the meeting. So that would be 4:30 tomorrow for something to get on the agenda for March 6th. There has been a bit of leeway in terms of committee of council and with the new council to allow some discussion item requests that come in on a Wednesday or Thursday. And you've probably, some of you unfortunately have had emails from me on a Friday that it's too late to add something to the agenda. So you have to, if you can get your colleagues to support it, add it at the meeting.
Thank you.
Councilor Bowman?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Peter, just wondering about the added delegations. Many times, we put out the agenda on the Friday, people read the agenda Friday, and they would like to come and delegate at the Wednesday meeting. And they don't have the opportunity to get on the Tuesday before, so that's generally why we allow the delegations to be added in.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and that's correct, and that's an exception in the procedure bylaw. So if there is something on the agenda about building a barn, and somebody reads about it on the weekend and wants to come delegate, they have an as of right to request to delegate, and the clerk's office will bring that to the chair and committees or council's attention.
Great, thanks.
Sorry, Peter, we still need 2/3 to add, we don't need it, right, to add the delegation if it's already on the agenda.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if the matter's already on the agenda and people are coming to speak to that agenda item, you don't need 2/3, they're added as of right. If they want to come delegate at committee on new business, and a member proposes to add it, it requires a 2/3 during approval of the agenda, 2/3 vote.
And that's, I want to do the same thing for us as also for staff.
Yeah.
What's not here, that we could wait 2 weeks and give staff that. Okay, good. So, any more questions? Oh, Councilor Vicente, sorry.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Are there situations where the clerk's office would see it would be appropriate for an item to be added to the agenda on the day of the meeting?
For you, Mr. Chair, I'll probably start. It depends on the urgency of the matter. There is sometimes, as the CEO has mentioned, urgent business that it can't be helped but has to be walked on. Something happened the day before that this council or this committee needs to deal with. So that should be the exception as opposed to the rule.
So only for urgent matters through you, Chair?
I've seen that in some other procedure bylaws. And other procedure bylaws, I've also seen that it's unanimous approval to add new business.
So what are the options that the clerk's office is considering going forward then with respect to adding items the day of a meeting?
So through you, Mr. Chair, those could be some. It could be criteria-based. I've seen that in some procedure bylaws. It could be voting-based, unanimous approval. It could be that we, as the CEO said, we continue on the staff level for some late reports. We do our darndest to make sure that we're meeting the deadline, so you have the material in front of you with enough time to review it before the meeting. I have also seen in some other jurisdictions, I think there is an urgent clause essentially for the CAO to bring urgent business, because the council may not be privy to it, but something has come up that the CAO is aware of, and it's an urgent matter that meets the criteria that has to come forward, so it allows the CAO to bring that material forward.
So if an item is added to the agenda on the day of the meeting, but it is being done in conversation with, working together with staff, would that be appropriate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think probably if you go back to first principles and the principle of members have a right to notice, to know what's on the agenda, you probably have to make sure that there's some urgency with that. You should make sure there's some urgency on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, yes, 9.4, we'll do it after. Peter, sorry, I have to go through. Do I need to, I want to reopen 9.1. Do I need votes?
Through
I
you,
just
Mr.
forgot.
Chair.
I asked one
Cap-
quick question.
Yes, so effectively, we've received it because
Okay.
you said there's no discussion and we've moved on, which includes 9.1. If you wish to reopen that, it is a 2/3 vote of this
Okay.
committee to
Just one
reopen.
quick question. So, we have to vote on it?
Yes, you do.
Okay. All in favor? Open up? Nope. E3. No, he doesn't vote. Oh. Yep. Yeah. So, just a quick question, Peter.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure, you do not have 2/3.
1, 2,
You-
3? 1 and 2?
again, I don't think people heard.
Yeah. All in favor?
You would like to reopen.
9.1, all in favor? Just a quick question.
There are 5 members of committee
Right.
here.
You need
and
3.
You need 4 votes because 2/3 is more than 3 of 5.
Okay. 1, 2, yeah, we just got, nobody asked any questions, so,
So, Mr. Chair.
we went on, and I guess we didn't say, I just want to open it for just a quick question, nothing else, so. So vote? Okay, that's 4.
So, Mr. Chair, it's been reopened, but to Councillor Dillon's point, I think as we go through each of these items, I'd remind you to maybe take a vote on each of them to receive them, because
Okay.
I took it that in fact there was no discussion, and I agree with you that
Yeah, there
you
was
said,
no one on
you know,
board.
consensus was we're just going to receive this and move on. So that's the way the minutes would reflect that, but I think we should take a vote, a proper vote for each item.
Okay,
When we get to it. Thank you.
so we ask the question first, and then we'll take the vote? Okay. My question is, I seen the letter here from Councillor Will. Nobody ever accused her, and it's very unfair for someone to accuse her for 10,000 mail. That was not done. Nobody ever said that, so I want to put it on record. We never accused her for how much mail anyone did. So, that's one thing. Okay, so let's take a vote on it. 9.1, all in favor?
To receive 9.1 and 11.1.
In favor, carried. And 9.2? Countable and 9.2, all in favor? We already discussed that? Yeah? 9.2.
Just receiving.
Just receiving, because we have to vote on everyone. 9.3, that's all in favor? That carries. So we'll go, I guess we'll go into closed session. You want to close? Yeah? Yep.
So through you, Mr. Chair, before we go into closed, the motion to go into closed should be read publicly, and you can just read what's under 14.1. There also is item 12, which is councilor's question period, and item 13, which is public question period, if there's anybody here.
Yep. So, okay, no one's here. Councilors, none? Public question? Don't see any. So we're going to close. Before we go into close, so this is a personal matter about individuals, including municipal and local board employees and labor relations employees, negotiations, council office transition matters. Okay. So we're gonna go there, we're gonna just stay here.
We were going to go next door.
Okay.
We can if you want. I know we had closed here before.
So I'm asking, you can have it here? Take that out? Well, there's only four, wherever you want.
Our guests don't mind.
Yeah. We'll do here, we'll do here.
Staying?
Yeah. You wanna stay here? There's no water here.
Yeah, it's right here. You want some?
So, Mr. Chair, just to, as we're back in open session, probably just to recap that committee went into closed session to deal with personnel matter, but identifiable individuals, including municipal and local board employees, council office transitional matters, and there was discussion, but no direction was given.
Council chambers, or we're just gonna adjourn? You already seen it, so. I'd just like to ask a question on it, though.
So if there are, through you, Mr. Chair, if there are members that are interested in going to the chambers, I can take you over after the meeting adjourns. I can tell you that this evening, we're supposed to be getting an update to the AV technical package, and I'm gonna be testing it tonight, and if everything works as designed, we're gonna then be, our goal is to have the first meeting in the new chambers on next Monday, March 4th, which is Planning Committee, and then Council March 6th.
Oh.
And if everything works, we are also gonna have an open house possibly this Friday for members, or before the planning meeting, just to make sure members are familiar with the buttons and everything.
Can I ask a question on that? So Peter, all the tables are fine, there's no drawers, you can't put a piece of paper, you can't put nothing inside. Like they should have had a little something underneath. Like, you know, before we had something, even at the region, they have, each one has their own drawer. Maybe they could add that at the bottom, it's not hard. Can't put nothing there. So if we have a paper or binder, we have to take everything, even a pen, we have to take everything with us.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that was designed anyways, that it would be, members would, whatever they take with them should take away after.
Okay.
Because it is a multi-purpose chamber, it's used for committee of adjustment, it's used for property standards.
Okay, yeah, I see.
So, but that's something as we sort of, the next 6 months, as we get used to the new chamber, if there's things that come up that we can look at, then we'll take them to this
Can we
committee.
make the circle a little bit more rounder so we see each other? Okay, so, motion to adjourn? Councilor Maderos, next meeting will be, no meeting,
I'll be talking with your
We'll be
office
talking,
and
yeah.
probably, possibly next week to go over some of the
already,
matters. Yeah.
okay. Thank you, have a good day.
Thank you.